Everyone can take their seats, please.
The agenda.
I call to order this special meeting of the Board of Education today, Thursday, December 9th, 2010. Roll call, please.
Okay. Mr. Charleston?
Here.
Mrs. Charlton?
Here.
Mrs. Hancock?
Here.
Mrs. Lubeck?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here.
Mrs. Thomas?
Here.
Ms. Casey? Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any public comments? Okay, you want to go ahead?
Well, just, we're starting a half hour later than what we normally do. I know there's been some concern about possible legal discussions, and so just throw this out to the board. We have Steve Cashman here, who we've been trying for several weeks to schedule a meeting with, and so I think it's advantageous to take advantage of the opportunity to have Steve here and the full board here. So to begin our discussion with long-range facility planning, and Steve can help facilitate that. And then if the board is agreeable, we limit our discussion this evening to 9 o'clock. And so, take care of the facility piece. If there's time remaining, we can begin our discussion about the capital development planning. If we hit that 9 o'clock time, then we can add that to the agenda on Tuesday. We post our agenda tomorrow, so we can add that piece Tuesday. And then adjourn into closed session because there is a desire to meet. We're resuming negotiations on Monday. So there is a need for the board's team to get some direction from the board as to, what parameters we can operate within on Monday evening. So that would be my recommendation as we have our facility planning discussion, see where we're at time-wise. We have still time prior to 9 o'clock to begin our capital development discussion, and then at 9 adjourn into closed session.
Sounds good. Yes, everybody good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do we want to have Steve?
Well, kind of where we're at, this is a continuation of a process we started. The board had an opportunity to visit all of our school sites, and they haven't had an opportunity to brief with Steve. And so I think Steve has some opening comments. And then I think he's looking forward to hearing what the board has to say about the facilities. And I think he's also looking for a little bit of direction because we've had the planning that the previous committee has done. We're looking to get community input on kind of next steps for the district. And then Steve's also looking for a little direction from the board as to how they would like him to proceed. So with that,
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Good evening.
Do you know if the monitors are going to be active?
They should
Okay.
be. There they go.
Just so you know, because what I wanted to do, I made sure I have all the plans, the buildings. I know I have aerial views of the sites, so where the discussion goes, sometimes it's easier to be able to see the building or the plan, so I want to let you know that's available if, desired. First, I appreciate all the time.
Hold on, he's going to look at
All your time in touring the facilities. On the kind of a related note, our team is working on the renovation replacement study, and just prior to Thanksgiving, we spent an entire day going through with architects, engineers, contractors from every different trade, and basically toured through Manning, South, and Miller. Some of the group had been already to the junior high and mostly the high school, the most important, but the high school project, cost estimating to enclose the classrooms and everything, is actually ahead of the work, the scopes, definition of the scopes of work, design concepts or kind of possible expansions and renovation options, and then cost estimating. So we really spent a long, arduous day, and it was fantastic. Mike was kind enough to be with us because there was there's been a lot of changes to the buildings, and it's not immediately apparent how things are functioning. You know, a school like Manning, where you go from the 20s to the 40s up to the 60s. So that was a great day. So we're on track. We're right now kind of defining the scopes for the renovation and replacement work so that we can put numbers to that and come up with drawings. We're creating some conceptual drawings to show order of magnitude as far as areas to be renovated, whether it's a minor renovation, a medium or extensive renovation, issues as far as scopes for utilities, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, space renovations and expansions. So that's underway, and then hopefully later this month we'll then be able to start to put cost estimates together, have enough information so the contractors can start to put numbers together. Our hope is at the end of January or into like mid-February that we should have a draft together that we can then come back to you and show you what we're up to. So that's underway. And then I really am curious. I mean, I appreciate all your time. It was really helpful to have you see the buildings because it's fascinating. One of my favorite memories of our tours was when we got to the second floor at the high school in the science area. You know, it's an unusual design, it's very curvilinear, and it's almost disorienting because, you know, we came up one stair, we went down another, and we started losing part of our tour group. I think that's just understanding, so everybody, some people have, you know, children in a certain elementary school, to see all the buildings and to talk about it as we walked. I think that's really helpful. So ultimately, I want to really hear more what you have to say about it. I have my own opinions, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions about that, but it really does help, and I really appreciate your time, because if not, it's really just almost too conceptual and not real, and ultimately, there's so many options, and the biggest trick in any kind of facility master planning or project is prioritizing. You know, what's the most important? What's the second most important? You know, what are those kind of guiding principles to move forward? Because it's not like everyone's rolling in money and you decide, well, let's just renovate and do everything all at once. In many cases, it's deciding what to do first and why you're doing that first, and then, you know, thinking about the children that are in the schools and that are rotating out, you know, every year out of an elementary school, out of a middle, junior high, or high school, and I think that's really crucial. One thing I don't know if we presented with the facility committee. It's kind of ended its work in the spring of 2009, and it basically had a year and a half of two bi-weekly meetings. Had a lot of discussions. We toured. We had the principals of all the schools talk to us, teachers, and then we had a summary kind of draft recommendation that just took, you know, district-wide and then took each building and kind of talked about priorities. And I thought that was kind of an interesting place to start because obviously that was you know, coming up on a year and a half ago, but there were some interesting things there. Some of it was kind of continuing on strategic planning, issues as far as security at all the buildings. But then it was, we also had some interesting discussions, and in, I believe it was maybe April of 2009, the committee wrote a letter to that board at that time talking about some specific concept that kind of bubbled up to the surface that seemed exciting to us, which was the idea of possibly moving the administration over to South and early childhood over there to create some additional space at Manning to allow some dominoes to fall there. An example would be where the district staff are in a standard classroom, a 1950s classroom, which is one of the larger ones at Manning, to move those adults out of there. Then you could then take a class that's in the 1920s portion, which are much smaller classrooms like you saw, and then take advantage of a better learning environment. The ability to open up the space where, you know, the superintendent's office is adjacent to the library media center, you know, could that become a computer lab and move the lab down from the second floor and then turn that into a couple classrooms. So that was something that was, you know, kind of going back, that was in the early part of 2009. But I think it was interesting because we were looking at ways, as we were talking, we realized that there were deficiencies in different areas. There had always been discussion about trying to get the administration into one location versus being scattered, you know, in Manning, different levels of Manning, over in the junior high, to bring them together into one location, and then especially to try to create some additional space at Manning without having to add space, just kind of moving people around and coming up, utilizing the space better. So I just want to comment on those two things because that was kind of where the facility committee stopped. And then our biggest point at that time, we really left the documents as drafts because we felt as a committee we really wanted to hear what the board and the community thought about these concepts to see if we need to investigate something more thoroughly, or if our priorities were different than what other people saw as the biggest needs. And obviously, it was a totally different world. I mean, we were working in 2008. I mean, when we thought things were bad, we had no idea how bad it was going to get. And that changes your mindset on even what do you want to tackle facility-wise. When times are great, people look more aggressively at attacking facility issues versus when the economy starts to falter. So that's really opening. I know there was discussion on the board about that kind of 5-year plan. It was a capital plan that we had been basically working with Mike and with Maureen and with Kim, items that had been identified, like the work at the junior high, the window replacements, the auditorium that had been identified years ago, but does that still make sense today? Are there different priorities? Are there things that aren't even on that list that should be on that list? Things that you think should come off that list? So I really, that's another issue that likely would be Tuesday, but they're all kind of interconnected. And I guess with that, I'd love to hear what your questions are, and if there's anything you want to see, we have the drawings. We can kind of work our way through.
Before we start, can I just ask, what are you
Sure.
looking at? Could you just talk about like a timeline, just as to what we're looking at here for the next foreseeable? You said you'd come back to the board in February?
Correct,
Is that what you're
with
saying?
the draft of the renovation replacement study. So looking at an idea of what would be the design and the cost to either replace Manning or renovate it, and then the same to renovate Miller, and then the same to renovate South, and then the cost to enclose and concepts to enclose the classrooms at the high school. So I wanted to still be in a draft form because even as we talked about that proposal with you, at that time we were talking about possibly replacing Miller or renovating it, and then as all facility discussions are, they're very fluid. You thought, well, let's just focus on Manning as a replacement concept. Miller, let's look at renovating that. So we would come back with that. We should have an idea then, any final changes, and be able to wrap that report up. And then I really think you'll have an idea, how much money are we really talking about if you're talking about building a new school? How much would it be to renovate and add on to Manning, and what are possibilities? It would be one possible option, but I think you'll see that by, I say Manning, if it remained and you're going to renovate it and keep it, that it's not just renovating to replace old, plumbing systems and electrical, but changes that would directly impact the learning environment. Because, both are crucial. You have to save functional buildings, but to make them safe and functional and not to address learning deficiencies would be, in my mind, a waste of money. So it's really, we had, and even our day as we were walking, it was kind of interesting as, this group of kind of engineers and contractors and everything looking at the buildings, ideas started popping up where we looked at an area, like an example, in Manning, back behind the stage, there's the old locker rooms when it was a junior high. They're totally non-functional. They're kind of being used as storage. We talked about the function of the building and how there's bus drop-offs there. We looked at, is that possibility to knock down that small portion to the south of the stage, replace it with something to provide some additional function off the gym, basically like a multi-purpose type space, pull it back away from the alley to eliminate that blind spot, because you come right to that sidewalk. So pull it to the east a little bit, and then do you create a spot where it's easier for students to be dropping off, going to the bus, from a covered, entrance, that's designed for that function versus the way you're using it right now, which is like an exit that you're trying to use the students there. Accessibility was a big one. How do you address accessibility at Manning? Manning has a number of interesting level changes. If you just imagine the main part of Manning, if you put an elevator that went from grade, first floor, lower level, upper floor, you've addressed that portion of the building, but the gym, you can't get to the gym. So when we were walking, we looked at this old area. I think, was it the girls' shower room originally? That's kind of wedged between the original 1920s building and the gym. There's a portion there where we came up with an idea that we could possibly move receiving, create a mechanical kind of head end for the school, and address a small elevator that would go into that location and would handle help on receiving. It would help as far as accessibly going to the gym. So if a student's in first grade and needs to get to the gym, they're not going outside like they are today, which would be a terrible time to go outside today. So it was really exciting, and I think we'll be able to kind of show you so you get an idea of what those approaches are and what the possibilities are. And then I think that would give you the information you need to kind of decide on how you want to go forward. So in end of January, early February, we'll have some information and start to see how it's coming together.
With the replacement study, as far as Manning goes, would that be difficult to extrapolate to say and go to just one school period? As far as just replacing Manning and basically replacing Miller and just have all the kids at one school, can you just take the cost for doing that and kind of...
Into one larger elementary school? You could definitely extrapolate it. You might want to carry a healthy contingency because when you get into a building that size, you know, do you have the site? The stormwater impacts are going to be much bigger. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges with building today, and you probably see it all around where you live, is stormwater and flooding are such problems that these old buildings, anything that was built before the early 70s, there was no management of stormwater. People just pretty much paved, you know, lots, put in curbs and gutters, built buildings, and they didn't care about what happened to their stormwater. An old town like Westmont has a lot of combined sewers where sanitary and stormwater are in the same pipe. It works great on a sunny, dry day, but if you get big storms, suddenly the sewers are overflowing, we're dumping it into rivers and lakes, and in many cases, you're having basements flood because if they're old enough and they have floor drains that are not connected to a sump pump, you know, it's backing up. Anything we do on a replacement is going to have a much bigger component when it comes to stormwater because, in a way, you're going to reset it, and it's almost, you know, as far as the county is concerned, it's a green site, you're building a new building, now you have to hold all that water on site during a storm event. And it's really amazing if you just think of the concept. Imagine a big site and it's a big storm. They basically, in simple terms, want you to release about a 3-inch pipe worth of water off your site on average in a big storm. And in many cases, you have 3-foot diameter pipes bringing the storm water to those sewers. So it's really a challenge, and the downside is it's money you spend and no one ever really thanks you for doing it other than preventing flooding. We know when we look at doing the renovation kind of expansion of Manning, we'll have to likely do some underground storage, whether it's along Linden or across the street in the property you have to the east. You know, and basically have underground storage tanks that would hold it and slowly just let the water go. In this, I think extrapolation is fine because in a while you want to have some idea how big. You know, is it a $15 million problem or a $5 million problem? And you'll have enough information to know that. Okay. You know, it wouldn't be enough, like we talked about before. It wouldn't be something you want to, hang your hat on and build a referendum around. But it would give you enough to know, is this something you want to do? And then you'd go, okay, let's research that more thoroughly.
Mr. Cashman?
Yes.
In this talk about renovate versus new, and we're sitting with these older buildings that we've been renovating in bits and pieces. Mm-hmm. If looking at Miller, because that would be a renovate situation, are we going to be looking at 5 years down the road that there's going to be issues because it's really an old building still? Or is it really new, like new?
I'd say it would be like new. I mean, it's you can take a 200-year-old building, and if you renovate it properly, bring in new systems, there's no point where a building suddenly is not functional, so long as you maintain systems and keep it up. The college I went to, we had buildings that are 160 years old, and they weren't knocking them down. They were just upgrading them. And whether technology, whatever, it's all possible. So long as you have a good structure, the rest is there's no negative to renovating a building. In so many cases, there's a big positive because the areas that, cost a lot of money and no one really thanks you for, foundation work, the structure, even though it's stuff that you have to do, you take Manning, there's definitely older parts, like the 1920s portion of Manning has the smallest classrooms, it has some of the oldest systems and everything in it, but you take the 1950s portions and it has classrooms that are much more appropriate sized. The 1960s portion, you go in there and you ask those teachers what they think about those rooms, and they like them. They love them. They're bright, they're big. So, and you have some unique things. You have a band room in an elementary school. I'm working with a high school that has a worse band room for 1,100 students than you have at Manning for an elementary school. So, there's some definite advantages to what you have. So, and the windows have been replaced. you've done work there. You have, roofs have been replaced. So, all that work that you've done and that investment is still there. Those windows are not going to go bad anytime soon. We'll all be gone before those windows need to, some new technology that's better than a thermally broken aluminum insulated glass window. So, old buildings with proper care, most schools, when you look at it, because It's very difficult, both on the student body, on the taxpayers, and just, putting that burden on a specific group of taxpayers. Most school projects in Illinois are renovations and additions. I mean, just look around. I mean, you can drive from the most wealthy community to the poorest community. It's the most common way to do things because it's manageable. You're not, there are good parts to every building. Like you take Miller as an example. The classroom wing there, the 1970s edition on the west end, I mean, there's some good spaces there. I mean, would it be a lot better if it had a new mechanical system with air conditioning? Absolutely, because the classrooms on the south exposure, they overheat. The library certainly is not as good as the one at Manning, and a new library would be a big benefit there. The gymnasium's fine. The mechanical system of the gymnasium's very noisy. If that was replaced with a quieter system and provided cooling, then, do you have an opportunity to work with the park district and rent it out in the summer for some park district program? So, there's definitely some good things. Then you have the junior high, which is probably your best facility. The high school, other than the open classrooms, I mean, there's a lot of great things about the high school. It's just the nature of that curvilinear building and those open rooms that's been the toughest nut to crack, and basically in 40-something years, no one's been able to get at that. But we'll be able to show you some ideas. Is it the idea that you'd ultimately want to do? Maybe not, but it will show you what you could do, and you could end up with basically net new space at that high school by doing an interior renovation project, and then pass along a better building for the future generations. I think when we toured, because it's an interesting building, when you go in there and you get back in that classroom wing, if you just did imagine a phase 1 project where you said, let's put some windows in here. I mean, if you went through around that perimeter and cut in, window openings and brought natural light in there, it would start to change the whole feeling of that school. Because once you really get into that wing, you have no idea. I mean, it's kind of a cave feeling to it. And just that natural light would totally change the feeling of that. So I definitely, it'd be great to say, just let's knock it down and build new. Architects, we would love that and everything, but it's not a reality. But you also think about your houses, like where you live. You look around, there was a tear down, craze where, they were knocking down usually houses that people had not invested in. Where it had a 1940s bathroom, plastic tile, didn't have any of the amenities that you really need as a family, or at least in today's world, where, where is the family room? Is it a converted garage? And people would maybe knock those down. But if it was a nice house and people had kept it up, those houses tended to be renovated and added onto. So, what we kind of do in our personal lives, I think applies also when it comes to schools.
So to follow up on what Diane's saying, so if we do go for renovating as opposed to, we really do have to then talk about built-in maintenance to keep these buildings going.
Right.
And that's part of the discussion then.
Oh, absolutely. You would have right now.
That we don't know.
No. I know by just in the last 3 or so years that we've been working with you, I can tell there was a point in time where prior to that there was a lot of just deferred maintenance. Things were not being fixed. But that has been slowly, Mike's been working on that and getting ahead of the curve. I think right now, because of, say, Manning and the fact that you have not really gone after like the plumbing systems, the hot and cold water supplies. You have these galvanized pipes that are, will pop leaks once in a while. You have an old steam system. You're doing a lot of corrective maintenance. Right now, probably more corrective maintenance than preventative maintenance. Ideally, you want those to be, if anything, more preventative maintenance is being done than corrective maintenance, because then you're not suddenly getting the surprise where he has a $50,000 problem and Kim's trying to figure out where to come up with the $50,000 unanticipated repairs. I think it was a couple years ago you had like a stormwater inlet at the high school collapse, and that wasn't on anyone's radar, and all of a sudden, it's an expensive repair. So you always need to have in your budget that maintenance, but I think once you do kind of infrastructure repairs, it will be much more preventative maintenance versus corrective maintenance. And that's easier to manage. You can plan for it, you can budget it. Like an example of that, we were looking at this, kind of this 5-year list, and you have a number of, not all, but you have a number of roofs that are a newer technology. They're single ply. They're either most of them EPDM roofs. So it's basically a rubber single ply roof, and they were installed 10 plus.
Yeah, anywhere from the early 80s up till the latest ones were 2001, 2002.
And they've likely gone off of their warranties, but that doesn't mean they're going to fail. And what we've done with we have some single-ply EPDM roofs that are, going 20 to 30 years, even though we had a 15-year warranty on those roofs. But the reason we were able to extend the life is we work with the client, bring out roofing contractors, do inspections, write a report, and then say, okay, here's where you have some areas that need some attention. Seams that are starting to peel apart, haven't failed yet, but are starting to look like they might. Flashings that maybe there was a high wind condition and some flashings are bending up. And then basically spend, tens of thousands of dollars to basically make repairs, and now you just took that roof and maybe extended it a couple years. And if you do that, every 2 to 3 years, you can take these roofs that you did full tear-off and replacements in the past, and instead of doing a $400,000 project, you can spend $40,000 on them and extend their life out. But it's a tough thing. It's hard to get people to say, well, let's go do that report and do repairs. But I would highly recommend, looking at that, because you have newer roofs on Manning. Same thing at Miller, at the junior high, and spending, tens of thousands of dollars now will allow you to, basically put off that replacement, because into the membrane, so long as the membrane is not failing, it's really just the seams and the details that start to become issues. And it takes a guy to take like a day and walk around, they test them, they're trained by those roofing manufacturers what to look for, and then they'll write a report, and then they'll give you a repair estimate on what problems there were, and that's really smart money, and that's correct. That's preventative maintenance, where you're going to take that roof and extend it. So, it's beneficial to you because then you're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're keeping it down in an affordable way.
So we're looking for priorities?
Well, one thing is, I would be curious maybe to start with is impressions. We looked at every building. I have my feelings about each of the buildings, but I'm just curious, were there surprises? Were there things that you thought were not as bad as you imagined, or they were worse than you imagined? I think that's a good place to start, because what did you think when you saw these facilities and saw them in detail? Because we pretty much got into every nook and cranny when we toured around. Those were very long days, and then, when you think about that, then it's like, where do you want to go? What are your priorities? I've talked about this again, there's safety obviously is always a priority, but I think, the learning environment, what can you do to improve those learning environments? You've been investing in technology. You have, buildings like Manning where, it wasn't designed for the amount of electrical equipment that you're putting into it today. So, do you want to look at something like that? You have, if Miller is certainly going to stay, you have a fire alarm system that's functioning, it's fine, but you could replace that and get better fire coverage in a system that now is good for another 10 to 15 years. And it's in place, and you've now taken that safety level and just brought it up a little bit. I think Manning, because of the number of rooms, everything's occupied at Manning, coming up with some creative ways to free up some space there would benefit kids today. And it's a tough one. Like when we do work on high schools, it's extremely frustrating when you do like a project that takes 2 years. Some of those kids will never get to use it. They're there during the dust and all the noise and everything. And then they go off to college and they never got to benefit from it. So, I think it's easy to try to come up with the mega project to solve all problems, but in some cases it's better to look at baby steps or step one that allows you to address some of your facility deficiencies and then move forward. With an idea of what your ultimate goal is going to be, but what can you do today to address that group of fifth graders that are going to go to the junior.
One of the things I was thinking, did people have phones? While people are doing that, Steve, I'll just step back for a second and say maybe a couple of things things to observe about that. Obviously, Mike and you participated in it at almost every meeting. Steve, certainly you underrated it, Mike, you do almost every meeting. The recommendations, the scope of that committee's work didn't have dollar constraints on it. And the idea was to create effectively two things: a wish list, if you will, for ideal educational spaces, what would we like to see in District 401. And we used, I think, the North Carolina schools template
Right.
as a reference point for that in terms
Right,
of
North Carolina State Board of Ed.
yeah, the classroom sizes and breakout spaces and all that kind of stuff. So it was, but then against that, we came up with recommendations that were sort of priority lists. And we said, within the context of those ideals, what are the things that we can touch on, in terms of priorities for our spaces? And there wasn't so much, I don't think, Steve, that the committee was more willing to be aggressive in terms of economics. It was more, because that question of economics came up.
Right.
Frequently. It was more, we're working on the pretext that there's no particular economic constraints. We're just kind of articulating what we'd like to see. The recommendations were probably more, were tinged, if you will, with some of the economic constraints that we felt were in place with the administration.
Right, to a degree. I think if we had really told them that, ultimately there's going to be fiscal constraints, I think the discussion would have probably been stifled, and people might not have thought, more creatively about what could be.
No, agreed.
We talked just about principal offices. Manning and Miller have these kind of old hand-me-down principal's offices that are not even close to ideal. And it was hard for the group to imagine something different. Something that could have a view of the street and that could have the proper space for staff to come and get their mail, that we're sharing equipment, meeting space and everything. So I'm glad we tried to make sure people thought out of the box, because the 30-something page kind of draft master plan, a lot of that is spelling out what should a principal's office be, whether that's at Manning, Miller, the high school, junior, what should that be? What should a nurse's office be? And you have these nurses' offices that are like 1950s version. What about today? How do you handle students with special needs more appropriately?
So ideally, that's a working document for you and for Kevin, Kim, and everybody else.
Absolutely.
To go through the design process.
And it helps too, because say you ultimately chose to renovate Manning and Miller. The buildings are different, but they have, there's similarities obviously. So, and you want to make sure if you're spending money on Manning that you're providing the same educational or similar educational experience at Miller. So, if you're going to, bring the library up to speed at Miller, what are things that are at Miller? Are there things at Manning that Miller has and Manning doesn't? Looking at trying to make it as even as possible, because you don't want people are they're all taxpayers, their kids are all important, and you want to make sure that the schools provide commonality of educational experience. And I think that document was part of that.
Yeah. So just a couple other thoughts then. The thing with South, when that came up, and I'm in a different place on South today, I think, than I would have been a year and a half ago. The South recommendation with respect to the Early Childhood Center and the administrative thing was, at the time, an Early Childhood Center sort of was percolating to the surface.
Correct.
And for whatever reason, it fizzled. And in the process, so did the conversations about moving the administration, because at the time we renewed District 180's, or not 180, but District 99's lease for another 2 years, or 3 years with a 2-year option or something. So, so the South conversation is different for me today, and it's different in this sense. I think strategically, as I sit here and as I look at economic constraints, both presently and going forward, the fewer facilities, the better, in the sense of economics, because for every building, there needs to be staff, and for each room, there needs to be staff, and for each function, there needs to be staff. And so we're looking for ways, I think, creatively to create efficiencies and economies in a very small district, and so I'm in a very different place on South. Speaking strictly for me, candidly, am not terribly interested, unless there's a really compelling use for that presently, or within the foreseeable future, in looking terribly hard at spending money in that particular facility. With respect to Manning and Miller, I think Miller in particular, the curtain walls work just fine, and I think the recommendations the committee had were the same observations we had, which were the library needs to be fixed, access needs to be fixed, the principal's office needs to be closer to grade,
Right.
and all those things that you already know. With respect to Manning, it's a much bigger systems challenge.
Correct.
Much bigger systems challenge. And I would hope that in the renovate scenario, that's the one that we spend a fair amount of time making sure we understand what that systems challenge is, not just to bring the systems in and to bring them up to sort of current standards, but to incorporate improvements to the educational experience in that context as
Right.
well. With respect to the high school, natural light, the phrase is walls and windows, right? Let's take a look at walls and windows. On the elementary buildings, we have a $1.2 million Illinois State Capital Bond grant that we have to match 2 to 1. We have 2 years to identify work in those buildings for that $1.2 million, matched 2 to 1 from us. So theoretically, at a minimum, that's a $3.6 million sort of scope of work. I would argue that we should go a little bit above that, and take a good look at within the curtain walls we have, with perhaps some minor adjustments, because I loved the idea that you threw out about that backspace to the gym at Manning. But within the curtain walls that we have, I think we have a fiduciary obligation as a board to bring a plan that says, here's how we can use the $1.2 million from the state, that's a grant, but it's going to cost us this much more to match it, so that effectively we get a 100% project that's 20% or 25% funded by the state. So those are my initial thoughts, that essentially I want to stay within our curtain walls. From an educational standpoint, I want to look at Miller and Manning still as both facilities we use. Whether we use them as neighborhood schools or grade level centers, is a question that we have to deal with as an administration and as a board as well. But
And I have a question about that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because will that affect how they're renovated?
A grade level, absolutely. I mean, you'd look at it differently. You'd have a higher concentration of, say the kindergarten level, and your kindergarten classroom at Miller is not nearly the same as the one at Manning. So it might impact even how you choose to go forward. Kindergarten classrooms should, by kind of basic design, should be at grade, have direct exiting, have restrooms, be even much larger than the one that's at Miller. But there's solutions there, like Miller, the area that SACID's using on the west end of Miller. Those are bigger rooms. When we were touring, that was one thing we were looking at is there plumbing out there to where we could take one of those and make that a kindergarten classroom, and take the current kindergarten classroom and turn that into a standard classroom. And then you'd basically be improving the kindergarten program from an educational point of view, but you'd also make it safer because they would have direct exiting versus shared exiting through the corridors. So, I mean, that's an important discussion. It's
So we
a
should-
tough one.
So before we make a decision, as to, we've got a couple levels of decisions we have to make here, or the board has to make. They have to decide whether or not they're going to, once all the financial information is in, decide if they're going to replace or renovate.
Right.
And then if that decision is made, if it's made to renovate, then you have to kind of look at whether or not you're going to go with the neighborhood schools or the grade level centers.
And so, Steve, I'll ask you guys just to incorporate that as you go forward in your work.
Okay.
Talk to Kevin and the rest of the staff about what would a grade level center scenario look like, and how would it impact your designs with respect to those structures.
Absolutely.
So those are clearly things that we'd need to know in order to make some fairly informed decisions fairly quickly.
Well, it just so happens that in our strategic planning survey, we do have a question in there about how the community parents and staff will feel about grade
okay.
level centers
That's good.
versus neighborhood schools. So hopefully we'll have a gauge on how all those groups will feel about that, so.
I think we've got a lot of different highways, and we're trying to now pull them all in, because it doesn't help us to tell you something here if we ultimately then go to grade centers or that kind of thing,
Right.
or using, you talk, at length about, the space at Manning. It's very tight. So to move the district offices over to South, so that definitely impacts that. So there's all of those discussions we have to have.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons why there was, I think, discussion about the early childhood is that exact reason, that access, because the South facility school has that direct access off of the street.
Correct.
As opposed to both Manning and Miller that don't.
They're actually supposed to have direct access out of the room. So if you really imagine the north group of classrooms, so at the lower level at South, and you really were going to do an early childhood program there, we'd be likely looking at exit doors in each one of those straight out to the north. Because, just because their experiences, their children are so young that you want to make it as simple as possible. Like, that's the exit, we're going out that way. And it's interesting, we were talking about this the other day about just the evolution of kindergartens, and it's really was a guideline. It's very common design practice. Always keep the youngest children at the lowest level, the closest, easiest exiting, and when the real young children, especially if they're in a half-day program, so they're not as familiar of what's going on, right out. So the teacher doesn't even have to worry about getting out that door and fight, especially in it's one thing to do a fire drill, but if you're in an emergency situation and there's smoke-filled corridors or something, just going straight out a door with a bunch of young children is much better than trying to, work your way out where you're combining with, third graders and fifth graders. And the grade level centers is a fascinating discussion because one of our clients, Barrington School District, it's a very large district. They have a lot of elementary schools, and they were debating that thing for years and ultimately couldn't really come to a consensus that they wanted to do that because there was such a resistance about the neighborhood school concept. If you did that, then, I live here because I like that school right here. I moved here because of that, and now, that's the school. And we see it up New Trier, with the feeder schools, they were starting to grow so much that it got to the Wilmette district where these kids were busing, their whole school life was, hopping on a bus because they just outgrew all their facilities, so they were busing there. And then when New Trier reopened their Northfield campus, that was a big debate. It's okay, we now bust them to one more campus. Ironically, it's worked out really well having the freshman campus because it's given them a year to kind of get their feet under them. And then when they go over to the big campus with 3,500 kids, they really feel confident, and it's worked really well. It was a compromise. It was a fascinating vote. There were 7 board members. 3 voted to have 2 separate high schools. 3 voted to move everybody to Winnetka, and 1 wanted to do a freshman campus. And guess what they did? And he ended up, it was amazing. Now that's a year, it's been a long time, and it's worked really well. So.
Well, I think Kathy brings up a good point, because that's why it's on the strategic planning process, because we want to find out from our community, what is it that people, the whole, what do we want our district to look like?
Right.
I think that's
right.
in there. So
and I think you'd want to be flexible too. Whatever, say you decide to do grade level centers, I think, if you decide, okay, we're going to make, Miller's going to be, or Manning's going to be the youngest grades, you'd want to design it in a way to be flexible enough that, if 10, 15 years from now, there was a change that the building would be flexible enough to become a normal elementary school, a neighborhood elementary school. Because it'd be terrible to cast that die so, severely that no one could really change, that you'd tie at the hands of future boards. So in facilities, especially in schools, flexibility, I just preach it constantly because it changes so often. You have no idea. In the 50s, they had no idea you'd be teaching school the way you're teaching it today. And, technology is still still kind of at the door. It's not in the schools, in total immersion the way everyone thought it would be by now. But it certainly will happen someday. And what's that going to do? We're doing a project on a high school right now, and that's the big question is we're going to go tour actually over here in Westchester, St. Joe's Catholic School. For 6 years, they've been doing one-on-one computing. So every high school kid has a computer. and his laptop. So how do you support that? What's working, what isn't? So we're excited to go there and see, how their 6-year experiment's gone, because they were certainly at the tip of the cutting edge, and I'm sure they've learned a lot. But that's technology is going to certainly change things. And
Okay, Steve, did you have something you were going to present to us?
no, I had all the drawings and the buildings available in case discussion focused on a certain area and you wanted to talk more in detail.
I was curious, do you have like a list of priorities or something that you wanted to share with us? Or
The only thing that I would just go back to, because it was a point where we came to the board in June of 2009, and obviously then I think, you were struggling with all kinds of financial issues and stuff, so, it just kind of stopped, but that was this kind of facility recommendations where it was a summary of the whole, thing, where we had district-wide recommendations, and then recommendations for each school, and as a committee, we tried to focus on just the key issues, not little minor space issues, but just the most important issues, and I just think I don't know if how much of this is still valid. A year and a half, especially in this economy, things are different now. And as even Dan was saying, the view, was different. Ironically, when we started talking about the administration, South was actually the last spot that we were thinking that it made sense to put the administration, because in a lot of cases, just for having adult visitors coming more to administrative area, that a junior high or high school is a more natural fit. That you're not bringing in, what are, basically strangers, but business people coming to a high school environment, they're mature, hopefully, young adults, or to a junior high. So we had looked, at the high school, at the junior high, is there a spot where you could take, do you take the wood shop, and can that become an administrative area? Or is there a spot that SACID's leasing at the high school, and you can make a spot and have, a separate entrance? And then it was really just that discussion about the kind of emerging needs of preschool, and kindergarten needs that made the thought of not having to bring in another administrator in to save on that is really where the dynamics came for South. So it was really, ironically, it was kind of the third choice, but the thing that was most exciting was just freeing up those spaces at South or at Manning for other uses for classrooms.
It seems like you would be able to free up quite a bit of space depending on what, if you, even theoretically, you could move kindergarten classrooms, or if you did do a full-day kindergarten, you could put that at South, possibly. There's all sorts of options, and I think, without having heard from our community at all, really, in form of at least the survey that we're putting together, it's difficult to say, what they want, but as a taxpayer, I would look at it just plain and simple. We've got this space. Why would we build either onto another space and then just let that go? Because I think that would probably cost more than renovating South for use.
Absolutely. Renovation is always less expensive than adding on or building new. Always.
And, living in that neighborhood, I certainly would like to see it utilized for our children's education, maybe not to the extent that it was as a full neighborhood school, but it would be nice to have kids it's a school, it's a school, and not just have it be simply an office.
Right. It was
From a
interesting.
community standpoint.
Like when we were touring there, there's some, it's unusual. You don't see very many single-section, elementary schools, but the small scale of it, is really nice. I could see why it's such, having kids there, it's great. It really harkens back to, smaller schools in the past, not, these really big elementary schools that are 60, 70,000 square feet. It's a smaller building. As say it was an early childhood center, I think even that aspect of it is a positive for the young children because it's, more manageable size-wise. It's in a real quiet neighborhood, so there's some positives there too, so.
And you're freeing up space, which is one of the big things that came here is breakout space, small group meeting space. I don't know if it would free up space at Miller?
Well, the other thing though is,
If
isn't
kindergarten
there,
would move, it would free up the classroom there.
isn't
one
there
classroom.
renovation though that has to be done at these other buildings simply because of age, mechanics and other things, and like you said before, just because of the size of the classrooms, that they're just not really conducive to, the learning. Just the fact that they're so old and I mean, there's just all these other factors that we would be doing a disservice to our schools and staff and students if we just didn't do anything with these other schools. I mean, there's
Well,
going to be a
like
certain amount of investment that has to be done anyway, is what I'm trying to say.
When it comes to just the issue of age, like antiquated systems, your biggest need is definitely manning, just because of its age. But it's a fascinating building because you have this 1920s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, as you work from south to north, with the exception being the gym. The 1920s portion, they're very small rooms. We went in with the entire facility committee, and as we were in there talking, I mean, it seemed like the room temperature went up 10 degrees, and you started seeing people counting desks, because they were really wondering, there's no way there can be 24 kids or whatever in this room. And that's a small space. But if you go to the 1950s portion of Manning, those are nice elementary classrooms. And to the point where we literally, Diana was smart. She started us in that small one, and then we walked across, and the difference was stark. Where in the one, I mean, the desks are going from kind of wall to wall. It's kind of a square room, very small, 500-something square feet. And then we went across, and it's in the 700 to 800 square foot range. And there's the seating area with 24 tablet armchairs, and then there's work tables. It was a totally different type of classroom, because you could do those functions where if the teacher needed to provide individual instruction to help a child, they could come over and sit down away from just the rows of desks. So it was just fascinating. And I mean, that room, if you took that room today and you brought more electrical so you could do whatever, smart boards, more projection, more computers, you improved the mechanical, so you had, better heat, air conditioning, it's a decent classroom. Compared to any, school district around here. I mean, maybe it doesn't match a brand new, oversized classroom, but it's a nice classroom. So there's interesting parts. I mean, there's definitely, I think the 1920s portion of Manning is by far your biggest challenge. But say you were able to free up space, as Joel was talking about, and you move that class from that little classroom over to, say, where Judy Duhigh is, which is a nice sized space, very bright, it's right on the first floor. Then that other space could become, is that a spot for a reading specialist? Is that a meeting room, which there's, meeting rooms are at total lack at Manning. So, use those small spaces that aren't appropriate for classrooms and make them into something else. You have old stairwells that are not enclosed like you'd have in a building like this, where there are fire stairs. You could put small additions on and provide, say, an elevator, stair addition, maybe add on restrooms too. So you have new restrooms, accessibility is addressed, fire safety is improved. Then those stairwells we could take out the stair, put a floor in, and do you then make that a small group room off of a classroom? So there's ways that you could take that and just totally rethink it. I mean, we're working with a client in Bennett Academy, and they have a 1901 building. And it was an orphanage, so it wasn't even designed to be a school. And it's amazing, with a lot of creative thought, I mean, you can really create some nice spaces, but you really got to get creative, and you got to look at where is it weak, where is it strong, and then how can you best leverage that. South, it's got that level change, which is a challenge. There's a lift there, so at least it has some level of accessibility. At least it's not, the basement level is a weakness at South. But ideally, if you reopened it, that would not be a student space. That'd be an adult space down there, record storage, something like that.
So I guess what I'm feeling is that if we decide to do renovation of Miller and Manning, we should do the best job possible, and invest the money, do the study, make it as future oriented as possible. Let's not just do the bare minimum to get by. Let's be proactive. Let's do it for future generations. Let's make it work for the next 20 years or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, schools need to last, forever.
Right.
And, any investment in a school at a minimum is a 25-year investment.
Right.
You're not doing short-term investments. And, an example, like you might look at Miller and, the boilers are newer, but the mechanical systems there are not ideal. There's no air conditioning in the classroom spaces, but you could design it to allow future, air conditioning. So, is that something you do, where you allow that as an option? If you took Miller and you improved the library, took that art/music room, which is an odd space and created, like, say, imagine an addition off the north, dealing with the Miller Mile and how we, would do all that, and off to the south. And you had an addition that, was a library addition, had maybe a large group meeting room and art, music area. Then what do you could turn that into something else. Maybe that area that's now the library, it's up a few steps. Maybe that's a staff lounge. It's an adult space. It's not a student space. The space below, is that like a lunch area so that they can, instead of having to set up and take down the gym, which you don't have to do at Manning, maybe you do that there and make that into a better space. And now you've, in a way, brought on the lunchroom level, you've brought Miller up closer to what Manning has. So it's, Miller has some nice, strong functions. I mean, that west end, the standard classroom's okay. The principal's office obviously needs to be, nearer to the street, and accessibility. Having an elevator there where you can get to all 3 levels is big. But,
I guess I'll have to say the same thing. I guess that was kind of what I was kind of thinking along those lines too, in terms of, maybe this maybe isn't the time to rebuild a whole new, there's not a lot of money kind of falling around. But the one thing I think we did notice when we were going through, the elementary buildings is that, it was very clear that Miller needs a new library.
Right.
And, things like that in the art room. And then the sheer, you talk about space, learning space,
Right.
the overcrowding at Manning. It's like
Right.
there's so many wonderful pieces of that building
right.
that are conducive to learning. But then when you have these desks that are, practically on top of each other, that truly inhibits a learning environment that
Right.
is good. So
Right.
I think that's another reason why the whole discussion of the grade centers becomes, because there's an inequity between the 2 elementary schools with that. So I think that's kind of why it's becoming like that discussion is happening more and more. And again, you talk about, the district offices moving to another facility we have, such as South,
Right.
that is right now not being used at all. So from where I sit, I think I would like to see something like that, to take the 2 elementary buildings and try to make their experiences truly similar
Right.
for the students. Class sizes, educational experience, the library. The Miller Library looked gorgeous, and a lot of that has to do with the teachers and the parents
Right.
that have made it that way, but they're doing the best that they can with what they have. But at some point, there's only so much space you can use. So from
Right.
where I sit, I would love to see, that the 2 elementary entrances, the principal's offices dealt with,
Right.
and the space issue at those, at least for the elementary schools, and to definitely talk about that, using that south land for the facilities for the early childhood, kindergarten, district offices, so that we can free up what the teachers
Right.
need to teach.
Well, like, Joe, I think you were implying, maybe moving the kindergarten, like out of Miller's, like say the kindergarten goes over there. I mean, if you just did that today, that would allow Kelly and that school to function differently. Because like there's a room up there, it's on the 2nd floor, west end, it's in the 1950s portion, and it's a standard classroom, but there's at least 3 different aides in there in that space. And, they're doing a good job, but it's not, if there's someone in there with a reading, challenge, they're being overheard by another student sitting next to them that's, has some other type of learning challenge. And that's not really the best way to deliver those services. You need and the staff. That was actually one of the things that was really helpful with the facility committee when we heard from those staff members. And it was really, in a way, we kind of said it was like the hidden space deficiency, because what they were doing was, pulling partitions into a corner of a library or room and providing services to students there, or in Manning very commonly in the hallway, pulling them out into the hallway. But they really could, if they just had a small space, they could do a better job and the students could be served better, especially the students that have, educational challenges. So it would really be helping them up. So I think moving a couple pieces around, you could really start to change things without having to do some major undertaking. Obviously, when South was open and then you had some extra elbow room at Manning, it was easier to kind of roll with the punches. I'm sure, I haven't seen like exactly, I mean, Mike would, as we'd walk through, he'd say, well, this used to be like where the PTO was, and this was a SACID space, and now they're over at Miller. And I could kind of get a sense for, they were, those spaces that were not as nice as, say, the 1950s classrooms, they weren't being used. They were using the best space and using those for other functions. And if you had a little elbow room, that's what you'd do. Or you'd turn them into, resource rooms or whatever, but you could take the experience. I always love first impressions, and my wife and I were in, Westmont, and she had never seen Manning. So we come down Linden. And she goes, oh my God, what a beautiful school. Because, you see that gymnasium entrance and the original 1920s? It's a kind of classic, it's really a nice look. But if I had brought her to the school through the alley, as my first adult experience and entrance, which is not the way you should enter Manning at all, it's a totally different experience because you're really coming in the back of the school. So, ultimately, whatever the future, if Manning's staying, the principal's office should be on Linden. That should be the main entrance. When we've had bid openings, we've had them at Manning, we've waited because we're just picturing some guy with the door locked. It's like 3:30 and he's trying to get in because the address is 200 Linden. He doesn't, even though we told him, you got to come in the alley, and, what if he's, he drove all the way there and he's not going to get his bid in. So, there's a definitely better future there. Miller is a little easier nut to crack. It's on the second floor in the back, but if you created something where the glass entry was, and you did a small addition there that had an elevator and was an appropriate principal's office and everything, you could have great visibility all along that street. It would be, someone come right in, they're right into the principal's office. You have elevator, they take you down, take you up, so you could really change the whole experience for Miller.
It's a safety issue too. You go into now Miller or Manning, by the time, when you ring someone in, they could be anywhere. And,
right. Oh, absolutely.
unlike at least the two other, the junior high and high school, that's, there's adults right there in both.
Right.
buildings.
Yeah, and there's that young lady who's right at the door at the high school. She can at least see who's coming in there. But like the high school, you'll see when we come to you with the estimate, because that was a fascinating one. We had all these contractors. It's like, okay, we want to enclose these classrooms and we want to change this, and they're like, how? Because it's really a challenge. It's a big sloping ceiling. It's all concealed spline. You have these, high-intensity discharge lamps that you see more in a gymnasium, and they're in classroom spaces. Sprinkler system that's totally archaic, was state-of-the-art then, but not anymore. So we did some drawings, and you could imagine there's two sets of doors that go into the high school. You always kind of enter the one to the south and come in there. The other one is kind of exit only. You could create a principal suite, so you could take that set of doors to the north. You have plenty of exits. That could be a windows or whatever, where the principal is able to see what's happening out in front. And you come in, and right there is a principal's office with, the proper organization. People, should be where they're supposed to be. And then, if they want to go into the school, they go through the principal's office to get in. Wouldn't be that hard to do, but you'll see we have just one concept. But I think when you see it, you go, okay, the high school could be totally different. It could be like the junior high. And, it's not knocking down walls and expanding it. It's using that space and just, redesigning it. The high school has so much room, for the 500 to 600 kids. There's a lot of flexibility there. I really think you'll be surprised when you walk in there, like with some of the spaces, and I think we saw that when we toured, the sizes of some of those pieces of pie that they're using as classroom spaces, they're double classrooms. They're really big spaces, which I'm sure the teachers aren't upset with, but for you, and you're talking about protecting the taxpayers' dollars, you could create net new space. And one thing like Mike and I have talked about is if you took that area and you redesign it, what if you end up with 4 new classrooms? Is that 4 spaces you can rent to SACID? Are those 4 spaces that you for some program that's not being served right now? So in a way, you're not even expanding the building. You could literally end up with net new space, and you'd end up with much better space than you have right now. So. The high school I think is exciting, and I hope to see that change, because it's it's an odd building. It has a lot of great features. There's parts that I really like. It's really just that south classroom ring that if we could fix that, it could change the whole nature of Westmont High School, and a lot of students would love that, and staff.
I wanted to add to you for my impressions, and not to diminish the renovation idea or the mechanicals or the safety or the openings.
Right.
But the impression I had that I didn't expect was going into the music rooms and realizing, the band room, like you were saying, is so small, and the sound level that would be coming out of there
Right.
could really be deafening if you're the guy on the other end of that, on both the junior high and high school.
Right.
That was something I was surprised with.
Right.
But the thing we haven't talked about, and as we've talked about, putting spaces together, adding more to one area versus, or separating it more, the part we haven't spoken of is we're affecting that community area by traffic flows and parking and the adults that have to come and facilitate. So I think we need to be aware of that too, because moving kids, moving adults is part of keeping your neighbors happy.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like Manning, it's probably quieter on Linden because, you push everyone to the alley side. And, it would be a different experience for those neighbors. You're fortunate that you have that little piece of land across the street, but, it would be different. Right now, things are real quiet over at South. If you reopen it, then it's going to have a different feel to it. That is a good point about the band room, the choral rooms. The choral room at the junior high is not great, but it's not, I thought the one at the high school, that was really challenged. The band room at the junior high is small. I mean, it's got to be deafening in there. We're doing a kind of fine arts project for a high school, and we had acoustic engineers in measuring, sound levels, and the first thing that jumped out is, they were talking about they were over 100 decibels, and they weren't even getting into the full part of their performances, and it was the teacher. He'd been there for a while, and he's like, well, I've definitely suffered hearing loss. And it's the room's half the size of what it should be for a normal kind of high school band. And, it was interesting seeing that, and just to drop it down just 10 decibels would be half as loud and would allow them to perform better. It'd be safer for the teacher. The students are being exposed to it, but on short intervals. The teachers are being exposed to it, for years. And that's important to think about. When we've done science projects, it needs to be safe for the students, but what about the teachers that are mixing chemicals? Do they have the proper ventilation? Because they're the ones that are going to be there for decades to make sure that they're not being exposed to something they shouldn't.
So in addition to what Diane brought up, I'm also curious because we have several lists of projects. Some are fairly sizable that haven't been discussed as part of what we've talked about thus far. We've been talking about big, what do we do about this building?
Right.
But we have pages and pages and millions of dollars worth of things that have been prioritized or have been placed later. Where does that factor into this discussion? I know there's some folks here in the audience today that have particular items on that list that they're interested in. Do we know if we have all of the items that currently need facilities work? These are lists that were created a couple of years ago.
I guess, Shannon, a lot of it was based on input from the staff, what we saw as needs for students. I know some of the big issues now we're coming up with now is accessibility on there. It's an issue we have to deal with in the next year or two, almost immediately. Safety and security are big things that we've heard in uniform spaces. There's a lot of things on there, and as you look at priorities, I think a lot of it will be based on what type of action the board would like to take on facilities. Some of those things won't necessarily have to be done if there's different action taken by the board. So basically, it gives us a summary of some of the things that we've been looking at over the past couple of years prior to discussing, our facilities and where we're going with it too. So. And there's been some new things that have been added on there that become a little bit more important over the last year or two, too. So, again, anything I can help with, any questions on it, too.
Well, on this list, the items that are listed for 2010, 2011, have any of these been completed?
Which list are you looking at?
I'm looking at the 5-year capital expenditure plan.
Look like this one, or
No.
this one?
The one that was handed to us?
Yes.
This is the one that,
The one that you that
Yeah.
says
The newer one.
the
newer one.
12-9 for discussion.
12-9?
Yeah, these are,
12-9.
these are new, these are items that were on the list, the prior list, and then anything with the little asterisk are new items that we've identified that are added to. So from the old list, yes, we've completed some of the things. We did the windows, We did the
Auditorium seat
operable
replacement,
panels, some of the floor
So-
pieces.
Those aren't on here.
And so
Those
those
are-
aren't on here.
those were on the-
Items that are completed are not on this list.
So items that have been completed are not on
this
this.
list, correct.
Those-
So
They
these
were-
are all open items.
These are all open items. And then anything that has the little asterisk are things that, we met and are additions to the plan.
Okay.
Like accessibility is a good one. We were talking about the young girl who's at, I believe she was in preschool or kindergarten at Manning, and just looking at, okay, now how are you going to handle, a wheelchair student in this building? So we met with Garaventa, which is a handicap lift company, worked with them, the fire department, and came and got a proposal on what that would cost to put a lift in. And then we did I did a quick study with a contractor, the general contractor that was working for the district that summer, and we did an estimate, and a little design and an estimate both at Manning and at Miller to get some sense of order of magnitude idea of what would it cost to put an elevator in. So you could say, okay, like this lift is $130,000. I mean, lifts are okay, but they're certainly not preferred. I mean, it doesn't help a lot of different, if you were a staff member or if you had a parent day and someone had a grandparent that was coming in, and to get them to take a lift is not really going to happen. It works for students. Elevators are for all, from young to old. They're totally accessible. They help you with moving things. And we know an elevator is a $600,000 to $700,000 issue at Manning. But then, it's a much, we look at it and go, would we rather spend $130,000, obviously it's cheaper, but what do you get for that versus building an elevator addition? And then if you did build it, how do you build it so it doesn't paint yourself into a corner to where you could build it, say, like, a year or two down the road, and then, say, 5 years down the road, you want to build a new principal's office, a new entrance in the school. You want to design the elevator so that it could be integrated into that. Like if you can picture the front of Miller, the concept would be to the right of the door, there's a location there that will allow us to put an elevator, equipment room in, and an elevator that would allow you to get to the main level, down that partial level, and up to the second level. If that was built there and we designed it right, you could then still build an addition for the principal's office and just integrate that into the design. And that way you could do possibly an accessibility project with the idea that it's going to ultimately be part of the new entrance to the building. But this is definitely the list always changes, and it probably should, because your needs change. Back to what you were saying earlier, Marie, about just maintenance and always kind of keeping an eye on that. In a way, I mean, every district we work with has lists like this. They have different names for them. Sometimes they come from the teachers. Sometimes they come from the administration. Sometimes it comes from a special need, like a student that shows up that has special disability needs, and you need to handle a blind student, so you make some investment there. But there's definitely very fluid. Items that come up by boosters, PTOs, they want to do something. Maybe you were planning on doing it, and then they decide they're going to fund it and do it. Similar like the funding, you did those playgrounds where you got support from the community. So you'll always have these kind of small project lists, and I see them just as complements to your larger vision of facilities. Because the biggest thing you want to do in looking at this list is, if you think about your ultimate plan, is to make sure that you're not doing something here that you would suddenly become obsolete, or you'd have to tear out. Example would be like on one of these lists from Miller, the fire alarm panel. I talked about this earlier. If you did their fire alarm system's functional, Mike keeps on top of it, but it's nearing the end of its life. So if you did this project, it would be an investment, and even if you renovated whatever, you'd be expanding that system. It would likely be a lot easier to expand a new system than the one you have there today. We did a 60,000 square foot addition on St. Viator High School, and we knew that the system they had could not be expanded. The parts were suddenly getting hard to get, and it was at its maximum size. So the year before we did the project, they planned a fire alarm upgrade. So we took the existing building, put a new panel in, all new devices, and then when we did the addition, we were able to tie right into that. So you definitely want to keep this list, these types of lists in mind in the greater picture.
Well, particularly because some of the items on here are not impacted at all by
Correct.
the decisions we're talking about. I mean, look at the junior high list on today's page, it's $1.7 million, and I don't think very many of those items really have much to do with some of these large building decisions we need to
Right.
make. But that's $1.7 million that needs to get into this overall discussion about how we're prioritizing our facility needs and how we're using your time, as well as meeting the needs of the, educational environment, so.
And it is like an example on the high school page. Let's see, which item is it? The item number 4, about the hot water boilers. The 3 boilers that are from the 1980s, just the nature of boilers and the stresses that they go under, I mean, those boilers, they will fail. And if you lost, I don't remember the 3, but I know at least a couple of them handle the classroom air handlers. So if you lose one of those boilers, you likely are going to need to close school until you replace the boiler. And then the downside is it's an emergency repair, and we all know, like, when that happens, you're not competitively bidding it. You're not getting by far the best price. You're fixing it because you have to. But that would be something you'd want to keep. And that's actually, when we first looked at this list, it was further down, and we talked about it. I said, that should be much up closer to the top, because you might want to start planning to replace those proactively, so that you replace them before they fail, because closing a school for, even if it was a couple days, it's going to have a big ripple effect and affect your the students and the staff. And
So just for the, item 3 and 4 on that list both say boiler. What's?
one is for hot water and one is for air.
Okay.
So is this list here that we have, is this basically, but in terms of what you're thinking of, in terms of priorities?
They were
Is that,
combination. We looked at things we felt were potentially most important, the most immediate, and the needs that we thought were a little bit further off on their end. Really assessing it, looking over a 6-year period, and seeing, basically, and kind of assessing where we think we're at as far as how long longevity of those specific items to on there. So,
yeah, so like if there's a decision to build a new school, then we wouldn't put fire systems in, but if we decide we're not going to, then we would probably really want to.
Right, for the buildings that are in play, it's critical to
Exactly.
this.
Right.
But for the buildings that are not in play, there's still a lot of money, a lot of projects on here that I think we need to be seriously considering.
Well,
and potentially things missing too.
Yeah.
I know for
I'm
sure
there's
there's a
some
junior high item missing off of here because I've been getting email about it and it's not on the list. So I'm wondering, I'm getting noise about a particular item that a community member is concerned about. It's not here. So
I have a
You're
question.
usually not inclusive. They would be such long documents. If you really, did a survey of the junior high and the high school and said, what do you need?
Well, and this
It could
is
be-
kind of a larger thing and
Okay.
been presented to me as somewhat of a safety issue. So it is an item that I was expecting to see. This one in particular. I've heard lots of other things about small individual interests
Right.
that are, I completely agree, would fall into that category of everybody has some little thing they want.
A safety item, then we certainly would like to know about it and see, and go assess it, see if there's, a way to easily and quickly solve the problem, or is it a bigger issue? And then if so, get cost estimates so that we could budget it.
I think the integration challenge, vis-à-vis money, is we're sitting on about $2.2 million in working cash right now.
That was going to be my next question. How-
And that money theoretically, is going to have to last us. That bond issue, we can't refund that bond issue until 2016 or 2017. So that money effectively has to last us, presuming we did nothing, that's got to effectively last us for capital improvements for another 4 to 5 years.
Dan, is that part of the money that has to match that 1.2 from
It can, but the short, all the state, as I understood the state grant, all the state grant said was, hey, look, we'll give you $1.2 million specifically for your, what are effectively 100-plus-year-old structures, Manning Miller, to do improvements in those buildings. But you have to match
Right.
the dollars we give you with 2 of your
2 to
own.
1, right. So where does that money come from?
Well, and that gets to the next point, which is I view this conversation as an integrated conversation between 2 sets of money. Money that we have and money that we don't. The money that we don't, effectively, Steve, is going to outline some, even the least expensive option is going to be a renovation conversation, which is going to be, several $1 million of money we don't have. And the only way to get that money is to do a bond issue. So to the extent that we pursue that conversation with earnest, it will and it should and will impact how we decide to allocate the $2.2 million that we sit on today, depending on the timing with which we pursue that conversation on a bond issue. So without, just as the word is supposal, I guess it is, right? Suppose for a second that Steve were able to put together a plan to do improvements and redesign and stuff at Manning, Miller, and the high school, and the total cost of those, just round numbers, $10 million, which is probably low, really low. And we said, yes, let's do that. The community was behind it. That would be money that you'd go out and you'd do a bond issue for, and then you'd pursue that. In conjunction with that, you probably wouldn't want to do with the $2.2 million you have. First off, with that bond money, you could then do the matching thing. That bond money could act as the 2-to-1 matching money. So with the 2.2 that you have, then you'd want to augment effectively that plan to bring in, what becomes effectively a $12 million kind of thing, but it looks like a 4 to 5 year plan.
So we also have 1 year to determine if and how we can use the 1.2 million. 2 years.
2.2 million.
Summer of 12.
No, 1.2 million from the state for the
From the
100-year-old
state,
plus
right.
buildings.
We have 2 years from the time that letter was issued,
Okay, so, and when was the letter issued?
this summer,
This summer,
So we have a year and a half.
like June.
We have a year and a half.
year and a half.
Of real time. A year and a half.
Yeah, was that after?
Year and 8 months, year and 9
July,
months, something like
August,
that.
the board, had to enter into an agreement. And that occurred either the
July,
or August.
June or July.
So we got a
Not
year and 8, a year and 9, but,
Before me.
at
not
some
August.
point, we have to decide if we're going to, aggressively pursue this notion of a project that requires a bond issue.
So then are we not using any of the 2.2 million to do any of this work?
Well, and that
question.
just becomes,
That's
that
the
becomes a
problem.
question. Not all of the work theoretically, that was in here, and the easy one that comes to mind are things like, at Miller, move the basketball court.
Well,
Right.
yeah, but what
So-
about,
so,
I'm
I
talking
mean,
about the boilers.
No. And boilers, for instance, boilers would clearly be part of a larger plan. So you wouldn't need to use part of, the 2.2 to do boilers. You would do it as part of the larger plan.
Yeah, there might be, like, if
No,
you
but I'm saying,
decided.
I'm
you
not
were-
sure we should wait, is what I'm concerned
Well, that becomes
about.
the conversation we have to have.
Right.
That becomes the conversation we have to have, because if we're going to aggressively pursue this renovate question,
Right.
it incorporates big systems. If
Well,
we
did
spend money on
he
big
said-
systems
did-
before we
Did I
do that.
misunderstand? Aren't those at the high school?
Yeah, at the high school, but like, say you were going to do the classroom enclosure at the high school,
Yeah.
like a proper principal's office and take care of that area. There's a mechanical component to that. If Mike nursed the one in Manning for 50 years, that unit. So, they might fail, but then again, they might not. It wouldn't be a catastrophic. It would not be economically great if they failed, but it wouldn't be totally catastrophic. You would certainly get a better, if you had, say it was a $2 to $3 million project to do the whole classrooms and everything at the high school, and you included as part of that those boiler replacements, you would buy them a lot cheaper than you would doing a standalone boiler project, because it's going to be part of a bigger project. There's definite economies of scale. It's amazing, like what we'll do a lot with, say you're renovating that, we'd make it an alternate bid. And then you'll know exactly what it costs. And it's amazing in that environment, we typically, those alternate bid projects, because they're part of the whole bigger project, tend to be, very affordable. I mean, we saw it with the windows at the junior high. I mean, that project was initially earmarked to deal with the media center. And but when we had the contractors out there doing takeoffs and coming up with, estimates for that, I said, well, why don't you check the rest of the school too? Because those are single glazed, 1970s windows. let's at least know what that's going to cost. And it was, the estimate at that time, which was about a year and a half ago, was $400,000. Ended up coming in at $225,000. So that, you hit the economy at the perfect time, in a down economy, and now you have new windows that are reducing your energy costs and making a safer and better learning environment at the junior high. So there would have to be a lot of strategizing about, what you're doing here, what's in the project, what's the best approach. I mean, one thing that Shannon mentioned, but like you take Miller, you might say, well, we should go ahead and do this fire alarm replacement at Miller because it's going to benefit, the students and staff there today. It's a good time to do the work right now because it's very competitive, and maybe it comes in at $100,000. You just saved yourself some money, and then that's money well spent. And even if you expand it, or even if you took an area and renovated it, new devices can be salvaged and reinstalled. We do that all the time.
So it's scalable.
Absolutely. So it's really I'm glad you brought this up because it is a fascinating relationship between these small individual work items and your overall strategy.
So, I mean, if we went after a building renovation, but we also know we need boilers at the high school, it looks like the junior high maybe has the hot water boilers on here as well.
Right.
We could, when the contractor's coming in for that section of one of the elementary schools, can we have the option to say, well, bid us the boilers in these other two
Sure.
buildings also?
Absolutely.
But that's where we're going to need your expertise to let us know what items we can wait on if we're going to do a renovation versus no, don't wait on some of these things because, it's okay to spend the money because it's not going to be wasting money.
An example, there's always, things tend to be, architecture is like, it's the art of compromise, and there's a lot of shades of gray and color. Manning would be an example. I mean, you might have a plan that you go, that is the ultimate vision for Manning. Like, we're going to keep it, we're going to do these renovations, these additions, that's what it's going to be. But maybe you decide it's still too rich, that it's too much right now. So then you look at it and go, okay, what portions of that can we do now? That then integrate, now it's a master plan, and say it was going to be a four-phase master plan. And maybe first phase might be principal's office and some internal renovation of, say, like the 1920s portion and moving things around. So now you've created better learning environments, a much safer, better building. Maybe you have an elevator, so accessibility is addressed, and it's not the full project. You haven't addressed like the addition down by, I can't remember what the east-west street is, like at the south end of the gym. Maybe you don't do that, but that's a future project because it's separate. It could certainly be a separate summer project. So maybe you break it down, instead of it being this mega project, it's in phases that are more manageable, but you have a plan and you're doing phase one. I mean, that commonly happens with schools because, when you come up with these plans, sometimes, it's really onerous what they're going to cost. And do you really want to do all that now? Or do you look at what can we do that will benefit the most number of students and staff right now, and then you work your way down. Just as you would prioritize a list like this, you can prioritize a design. I mean, you've probably all done it in your houses where, you got the bathroom, and you got the kitchen, and you have, these discussions with your spouse about, well, what are we going to do? Or maybe there's he wants to build the man cave, and you're like, well, that's, sorry, that's not my priority one, that's priority 10, and then, you want the, big kitchen, and you decide what makes the most sense, or maybe what has the best resale value, whatever, and you kind of phase it. Ultimately, you hope to do it all, but you just decide what's going to be phase one, phase two.
And the thing that's not spoken there, but every family deals with it, is you tailor your projects not only against your priorities, but against your funding sources.
Right.
So to the extent that, we need funding across a certain number of phases, if the practical effect is we have a certain amount of funds now, and you got to go to the well for more funds, i.e. the money we don't have, it may just be a two-phase conversation where if we're going to go to the well, get all the money and then do the work, because you're not going to go to the well 4 times.
Right.
Right.
And then I think there's also the equity. I mean, if you had a plan and you realize what the cost is and you're focusing on doing work at Manning, you certainly wouldn't want to neglect Miller, because just the same number of taxpayers. And that's really interesting when you get to high school levels. If you do it's typically there's like a pecking order, which is kind of fascinating, but say you did an athletics project. Well, they're now at the back of the queue because there's people in performing arts that want a better band and choral room. and to, and the athletic director might say, well, I still want to do that, baseball field or those bleachers or whatever, but you're like, well, we just can't. You can't really focus and you have to be as fair as possible and democratic and spread the money. There is democracy in construction. It's kind of fascinating because I always think it's important when you design things, you don't design for specific staff because, they might retire and the next person comes in and is like, oh, I hate this space. I mean, you need to really get as many ideas so that it's a decision that was reached by the whole, and it might not have everything that everyone wants, but it's a really good solution, and that way, as time goes on, everybody can benefit from it. And, I've said this before, but architecture truly it's the art of compromise. You never have, even if you're like the wealthiest person, had a lot of land, you will have conflicts within your own needs and wants that you'll have to make a decision. It's fascinating.
Okay, so just in terms of time in that, do we feel now at this point that we have given you enough direction to look at the things at Miller, look at the things at Manning, definitely look at the walls and windows and look at the facility itself for doing that?
We were already doing all that
Already
with
doing all
with that project.
Okay.
Just so you know on time, because we talked about this before the meeting, I know you have a meeting on Tuesday, that I'd be more than happy to come back and talk, about other details or specific items, because,
I have a
okay.
particular question,
Yes.
and since Mike's here as well. For this school year, because I don't see check marks on here, are there things that are already moving that you are expecting to do regardless of the outcome of this discussion? Or is everything up for debate right
I
now?
think right now, everything more
Yeah.
or less, I think
We're going to talk on that on Tuesday.
Right.
We'll talk on that on Tuesday.
Camera over at Manning,
Yeah.
the rear entrance on there, that was the only thing that we had really.
For sure.
For sure.
Was one
Okay.
of the things that we wanted to get done on there, because we wanted to make sure we had something equal to what we
Yeah.
had, as far as something that pans a little bit better than the current system they have.
Okay.
So is there a consensus then on the board that we are not looking at a new building, but we're looking to renovate?
Well, I
Or
think.
are we
Well, I think.
asking that?
No, the idea
Isn't that
of
what we
him
asked him to
providing,
do?
of Steve providing the report that he was providing is going to have both.
yeah, you're going to have the
Okay,
answers
so
to
you're
that.
still going to do both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and, with the.
Because nobody mentioned it tonight. I'm just asking that.
Yeah, no, because I think it's important for you to
Trying
know,
to-
because people will ask you. I mean, it was interesting when we did the facility committee, someone, because we met a lot in the community room at Manning, and I remember we were probably getting ready for a meeting, and someone goes, well, it's got to be cheaper just to knock this thing down and build a
Right.
new school.
You wanna be
And I
able
said,
to-
well, I wish, but it's not. I mean, think of all the things that you have there. I mean, foundations, site work, all these things that you rip that up, you pay dollar for dollar to put it back in, and you're paying to rip it out. And, and then it trigger all kinds of issues as far as time with the village and with the regional office of ed, so there, it's complicated, but someone's going to ask you that. And I think it'd be good for you to know and say, hey, if we built a new school, it's going to cost, whatever. It's going to be, it's going to be somewhere in this range of, above $10 million. And they're going to go, okay, well, then that's, okay, good.
Okay.
I know.
So as far as.
I just want to be clear. I was not saying that at all. It's just that nobody had brought that up. But that is a very good point. So when we do talk to our community,
Correct.
We have,
That
okay.
was why we initiated
Yes.
that in the first
Right.
place.
So as far as what we're getting from you in the way of a report, Dan had asked earlier if it considers grade level centers versus.
Right now, it does not.
I mean, I think that's potentially
That
an
might
issue
be-
because that's something that
You
has
know what, though?
been,
There might be a next
discussed.
phase.
I don't know,
depending
it's in
on-
the question in the strategic plan, it's.
Right, and I think we need to see how that plays out, don't you, maybe?
I mean, I think we'd be able to, with the report, Shannon, what we come up with,
That right.
like, say,
right.
renovating Miller and renovating Manning, I think we'd be able to, if that was a direction you wanted to go, we could take that data and probably be able to then go, okay,
So that's what I'm asking.
yeah.
How easy is it to, make some generalizations
we'd
based
want,
on?
I would want to be, we'd have to sit down and talk with your principals and really look at it from a curricular point of view, like, what is it going to be?
Right.
Because one of the two schools is going to have, if that was the way we
Right.
went, one of them would have to be a K through 2, and the other one would have to be a third.
And I could tell you, just sitting here today, it would be easier, for K through 2 to take Miller and make it a K2 than it would be Manning because of just the elevations of grade. And then in a way, too, I mean, because Manning was a junior high.
Junior high, yeah.
It's actually still has the remnants of being a junior high, so it kind of affords itself to the upper grades a little bit better. And then just even its challenges, it's more, having 3 levels is better, I think, for older kids. So, that might be a quick decision we make and go, okay, what would it take then to put in, additional kindergarten rooms over at Miller? And then we'd, come up with costs, and we could take our current report the way it sits today and come back with an answer for you.
Okay.
So do you have from us, and does anybody else want to?
Well, in terms of process, do you just go back and do work with the administration now, or is there a facilities committee that we reconvene, if you will?
I think that's the question, Steve. At some point in time, we want to engage the community.
Right.
And so I guess in terms of your timeline, when do you envision that occurring? Is that after you come back to the board in February?
Absolutely. I think it's after you really make the number one question is, the future of Manning. I mean, that's crucial. I mean, are you talking about building new or renovating? Because then that takes that decision off the table and allows you to look forward in a different way. We have everything we need to do that report that we proposed. Right now, it's a bunch of, really coming up and making sure that the scope of work from site work to data telecom, that we have those all figured. And then what you'll be able to see, this isn't just going to be a lump sum like it costs this. You'll be able to see from, electrical, plumbing, where the money is and how big it is and why. And you'll see, like Manning's a good example, we wouldn't do the same level of renovation in every space. If we took like the 1950s classrooms or 60s, the light fixtures are from 1950. We'd likely want to replace those. The sprinklers need to be replaced. But you'd see, okay, what's it cost to put a sprinkler system throughout the school? And then you'd see what it would cost to do it at Miller. And you'd see, okay, what's the cost to renovate those areas? What's the cost to do extensive renovation in the 1920s? So you'll have a lot of information that you can then use to make future decisions. Once you get the report and you really decide, are you talking renovations or replacements, and you get an idea like the high school, you go, okay, this is not a $100,000 problem. This is X number of, this is this kind of problem. Then you go, okay, how are we going to do that? Where is that going to fit into the mix of, what you're raising is the whole funding question. What comes first? One thing, just because it happened, kind of seemed to be during a change in the board. In the past, Siemens had come and started to do a little bit of work on performance contracting with Steve Ball and with Marine. And we worked with them with other clients, and that's basically another financing mechanism for infrastructure work. And basically, in simple terms, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this concept, but we've done projects like this at New Trier, we've done projects at Barrington. A lot of school districts have done it, and you've actually done it here in this district. The most common, and the ones that you've kind of gone after, was lighting.
Lighting and windows, actually.
So you take old light fixtures with T12s, and they'll come in and they'll basically analyze your building and look at what potential energy savings there is for you to replace this old, less efficient equipment with new equipment. They come up with a price. Say it was $1 million, and then they figure out what the annual savings are, and then you could come up with a term, like say it was a 10-year term, a performance contract covers 10 years. You would then know that every year you have a fixed amount you would pay them, and they finance that work. But the advantage of, instead of, you can't afford because you don't have the $1 million, you only are paying the $50,000 in year one, but you're paying that out, and you can project it from a business manager's point of view. You can put it in your budget. We're doing a project right now with a small district, 2 schools. They have unit ventilators from the 1920s and 1940s. They came in, they put an RFP out. A number of energy service companies came in and looked at it. They have equipment that's not even running. Classrooms are overheating because valves have broken years ago. And it's been on their to-do list for a long time. But it's a hard thing to go out and sell a referendum to do boiler work. I mean, people just don't get excited. I mean, they want the boiler to work, but they don't get excited, and it's hard to raise money because it might make the classroom more comfortable, but a library edition would be something they'd be more enthusiastic about. So they ultimately decided that it's not a referendum item for them. So they went out and they're going to do a performance contract of some magnitude, say a $2 to $3 million project, and over a 10-year period, that's how they're going to finance it.
So how do we do this then in terms of you bring something back to the board, and then in terms of what we're talking about, like then we would then discuss it and then have the facilities committee work now or later, or?
It could, the facilities committee meeting, you had a really good cross-section. It had everything from, community members, board members, faculty, and that, I thought, brought a good, cross-section view. I think the board, if you made a decision and said, okay, we have a strategy on how we're going to fund the matching money for the grant, and say it's $3.6 million, then, okay, what's the priority? What do you want to do with that $3.6 million? Maybe that's, step one. Say, like, this is just a suppose, but suppose you just took the working cash and that was your matching money or whatever, and you go forward. Then I think you would say, okay, it's important for us to do this at Manning, to do this at Miller. Maybe we can't do, enclose the classrooms at high school right now, but we're going to do, that's going to be our next thing. Or maybe you decide that, no, we want to do it more comprehensively and like you said, do a referendum. And then you go, what's the scope of that? You define it. Because if you defined it more clearly, then, we can certainly look at what you want to do and make sure those numbers are rock solid so that you can go out and then
Well, I think
sell
I need to, as a practical matter, we need to say a couple things out loud here first. There are certain things that you would have to, like new construction would absolutely require a referendum.
Absolutely.
But work within the curtain walls may not. Boards have, the latitude to issue bond, to do bond
Absolutely.
issues.
If you have bonding capability, you could do.
And our district has, a very healthy bonding capacity right now. So, there's a scope of work that, we could define that actually is fairly robust, that wouldn't, if it stayed within the legal constraints of
Right.
The code, wouldn't require the referendum question. It would only require a bonding decision by the board. So, and I think it's important to say that out loud, just so that the board understands that as well, that amongst the many decisions we have to tackle, and amongst the many decisions we're going to have to talk about, is, the question of funding isn't just a question of what the dollars are, or even where they come from, because where they come from ultimately is easy. It's always from taxpayers. But there is a logistical and practical question about how you trigger that.
Well, and as far as input from the community, I have a question. We have questions on our survey to address that.
Right.
So when are we going to get that out to the community?
Well, I think Friday I sent out a draft of it, and, if everybody is okay with that draft, then we can work with Linda Hansen and, get that out. If the board agrees with the timing, and, we can get that out.
Yeah, because I think that if Steve is going to have the report to us by, the end of January, February, we can get that survey out and start allowing, the community time to complete the survey. And then we can maybe get the survey results about the same time that the report is done.
Yeah, the conflict we have, we talked about this at the last board meeting too, is right now we've got another survey that's floating out there on the superintendent search.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
So we
that's
can go back to our timeframe and
Well, then,
get.
and then I think, so once you come back to us in January, February, we need to have a presentation to our entire community, and we need to have some kind of forum thing where we discuss all of this and get input from our community too. So that's a level that we have to do too.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that would be, the survey will certainly help, but that's even a better opportunity to find out, do they agree with these assumptions and, the priorities and.
So timeline-wise, that's a word, you'd be coming to us January, February, and then would we schedule something like this shortly thereafter, or how?
I think it would depend on what your response is to the draft report.
Okay.
I think what I kind of envision, Steve, is that you would come back to us with the report. The board would have their opportunity to discuss, and then from there, we would engage our community, and we can determine if it's, again, going to be a cross-section of various stakeholders who, based upon the feedback from the board, they're looking at the same information and giving their input as to how they see it's prioritized, or if it's set up with a couple of forums, in various buildings, and give an opportunity for people to view the information and provide feedback. But I think once the board has an opportunity to see the report, have a discussion, then that would be the opportunity for the community engagement.
I would observe that the February date makes a whole lot more sense because January 25th, we have a revisit with the IASB.
Yeah, probably
Right.
February.
Right. Okay, so,
I mean,
early
ultimately,
February?
once we finish this report, the timeline is really up to you on how you want to proceed, how quickly you want to proceed, in what manner. I mean, you can have forums, you kind of have those public forums for when you were talking about budget reductions and everything. You can have meetings like that and talk about facilities. You could take and create a facility committee that's a cross-section of, community members from each feeder school, and then do workshops. I mean, there's other ways you can do it. But ultimately, it's up to you to decide how you want to proceed. And I think once get a sense of order of magnitude of cost, it makes it easier. I mean, I always, in the construction world, there's problems. Murphy's Law is kind of construction. And you always get this thing, oh, we got a problem. And it's a great opener for any conversation. I always go, well, what kind of problem? Is this a $500 problem, a $5,000 problem, or a $50,000 problem? Because it helps you frame what the issue is. I mean, if it's a $500 issue, it's going to be easily resolved, and you know what you need to do. If it's a $50,000 potential issue, then a whole lot of work and effort has to happen. But I think that's where you need to get some sense, because I like the high school. That's an interesting scenario. I mean, it's a tough thing to crack, and we've just starting to get some preliminary cost data in. We still have a bunch of holes, but it's intriguing what it takes to do that project. And then how long would it take? Because it's not a summer. It's like a couple summers to actually do the project, because that part of the school is actually a big square footage. So then you'd even know time-wise.
So we can look
time.
at then early February.
Yes.
We'll do that at the first February meeting.
Right.
Does that sound?
Mm-hmm.
And it is possible that as we get closer to putting this report together, that we might have some specific questions that we need answered, and that I can work either with Mike to get those, or if it's something that needs to be talked about, we could come to a board meeting and just discuss, are these assumptions, are we heading in the right direction so we don't, spin our wheels on some things.
Is that?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just say, that's all fine. I'm also curious, though, in the interim, do we still have things we want to have getting done?
Right, like
and then
next
So I want
year.
to make
Tuesday.
sure.
we're going to talk about that Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Shannon. We're going to focus on the list that
Okay,
you have there. And that'll be the focus on
on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd definitely love to hear about the junior high issue.
So do we have people here this evening that thought that was
No.
going to be the discussion
No.
and what we're going to be
Tuesday.
talking about? Okay.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to request that if it's a long report that you're going to provide for us.
A long
that
one?
maybe we get it a little bit ahead of time of the meeting.
Oh, absolutely.
Have a
Oh, no,
chance to read
absolutely.
through it.
'Cause I would like you to be able to read all through it so that, you're able to digest it and see it. We're obviously going to have like an executive summary that gets to the point. It's always great when you do any kind of report that has cost in it. I don't care how you present it, everyone flips to the back page. You're like, where's that cost? But we'll have an executive summary, but there'll be lots to kind of absorb, and we'll certainly get that to you before we have the formal presentation so that we can have a good dialogue.
Thank you.
Did anybody have anything else before we thank Steve and Mike for coming?
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So we didn't get to that. It's past 9, so we'll put that conversation off for Tuesday. We'll add that to our agenda for Tuesday.
So is Steve going to
Okay.
be back on Tuesday then?
Yes.
Are you going to come back on Tuesday?
Yeah, actually, Kevin asked me, and I checked, and I'm free Tuesday night, so I will be.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And then Mike, you'll be with us on Tuesday? Okay, great, thank you. This stuff takes a lot of time.
Oh, Marie, can I ask another question?
Yes,
Not
yes, yes.
related, not related to the actual facilities, but the plan or the process or the timing. So we've already identified that there are some discussions that we need to have around community schools versus grade level centers, and I realize we're getting feedback, but we should probably not be waiting for the feedback to start those discussions.
So that'll be as part of our, budget reduction planning process.
Okay.
That will be, I'm sure, a conversation that we'll be having. So we'll be, as a board, you'll be looking at that question and discussing it over the next couple of meetings, so.
Okay.
It's kind of like all these pieces. So does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think I'm just running through the calendar in my head, and that means we're doing everything all at the same time.
Yes, we are. Okay, anybody else? Okay, then, before we go into close, are there any public comments? Okay, then we will go into closed session to discuss negotiations. And there's no vote?
Do we need a?
Yeah.
Need a motion.
So move,
So is there,
or I move to go into closed session.
okay? And who's,
Second.
all in favor?
Do we need a roll?
And then roll call, Mrs. Casey?
Okay, I'm just writing down the time. Okay, Mrs. Charlton,
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock,
Yes.
Mrs. Lubeck,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Ms. Casey, yes, Mr. Charleston.
Yes.
Okay, and then our next meeting will be Tuesday, December 14th, 7 o'clock.